Hey y'all, who dat, and welcome in. I am Jeff Nowak. This is Inside Black and Gold Draft Week edition, aka let's get an episode done before the draft edition. Been kind of a weird week. We're recording this later than I wanted to, some scheduling issues. Steve had some issues, so I'm going solo today. So I kind of just wanted to catch up on the last few bits of news leading into draft night. Going to be a crazy few days. The Saints have 9 picks, including number 9 overall, number 40 overall. Also have 2 third-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks. How many picks are they actually going to make? Are the Saints going to trade up? Are they going to gasp, trade back? We will find out. But today, I just wanted to kind of go over what we all heard from Mickey Loomis. Today, he spoke to the media for about 35, 40 minutes. Did his typical pre-draft press conference. I don't want to be here. I'm not going to give you any information. This is kind of a dumb thing. And to be fair, he's right. I don't know why they have the GM come out and do a pre-draft press conference when everyone and their mother is trying to not give away any information, any draft plans, any whatever. This should be a post-draft press conference, something Mickey Loomis doesn't do because he does not have to, because it's not mandated. This is mandated. So anyway, that's where we are. You know, today, they kind of came in, the Saints kind of came in knowing that everyone was going to be loaded up with questions about Derek Carr, Derek Carr this, Derek Carr that. So they kind of got out ahead of it, right? So this first segment, we're going to talk a lot about that, talk about some of the news that came out in this press conference. Not a lot of it, but some, not zero. So we'll get into that in this first segment. Second segment, we're going to hear an interview that Steve and I did with Justin Mello of the Draft Network, get you ready for Thursday night's action, talk quarterbacks, talk positional value, talk all of that good stuff. We've had him on here before. Great insight. He's talked to like 200 of these prospects. I'm not exaggerating. He really has. He does this interview series every year. It's really great. So he's got a lot of first person kind of insight. So we'll hear from him in the second segment. Final segment, I'm going to roll through mine and Steve's final mock draft. We did 7 rounds, so just reading through all the picks is going to take an entire segment by itself. Steve won't be here to defend his picks, but I do want to get it on record so he can be just as wrong as everybody else in this mock draft paradise that is, I have no idea what these picks are going to be. But let's get into it. Mickey Loomis, obviously, as you mentioned, didn't want to say a lot, didn't say a lot. He knew he was going to be facing a barrage of Derek Carr questions. So they came in with a plan. And that plan was, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm not going to say anything. And then from that point on, every Derek Carr question, I am going to shoot down. And if you don't believe me, this is how Mickey opened his press conference and how he responded to basically every question from that point on.
Hopefully answer the questions about Derek Carr. He does have an issue with his shoulder. We're hoping to get some resolution and clarity on that in the near future. And when we do, I'll report back to you. Otherwise, I don't have anything more to state about Derek, but I'm open to any pre-draft questions that you might have.
Mickey, would you say when the news broke about Derek that you were surprised by it, or was this something you guys knew about before?
Yeah. I'm just not going to answer any more questions about Derek. I mean, this is a pre-draft. If you have questions about the draft, then I'm more than happy to answer those. But in terms of the roster and Derek, I'm not going to answer any more questions about that today.
Yeah, so that is basically what you had. You had Mickey Loomis going out there and saying nothing, right? And making it very clear he was not going to say anything, which is a strategy. It's a choice. You know, the words he used were clarity, resolution, stuff that doesn't exist right now. He did say that he would give us this information later on, at a later point, when they have it. Take from that what you will. I feel like it's telling. You know what? Like, the reasoning they gave for not wanting to give any information is they don't want it to be, Mickey does not want it to be construed, thrown against the wall in some way that it's not intended, whatever. They don't want to create a bunch of crazy storylines the day before the draft. And I understand that. But what it's doing is creating a vacuum of information where everything can be true. And I just don't think that's healthy for a team. I don't think that's healthy for a player. And that's just the situation that they have embraced. Now, what it is telling me is that the answers to these questions are not simple answers. And by that, I mean, if the answers were as simple as, we are committed to Derek Carr, he is our quarterback, we are looking forward to moving ahead with Derek Carr as our starting quarterback, right? If that was the answer, that's what we would have heard. And that's what we heard earlier in the offseason. So clearly something has changed since that point, because if it was, again, that simple, then we would have gotten a simple answer. We did not get that. We got no answer, which is a pretty steep, pretty sharp kind of about face from where we were earlier in the offseason. So we'll see how this goes. Again, we got no new information. Mickey wouldn't even confirm what shoulder the injury was to, what the timeline is, what it was relative to, anything. And whether you think that's because they don't have the information, which I think is definitely part of it, or you think they're withholding information, which is also definitely part of it, it's not a pretty picture. And if nothing else, what today confirmed to me is that this is a sticky situation. This is not a simple, well, it's being overplayed in the media situation. This is a situation that is going to come to a resolution, and we just don't know what that's going to be yet, but it's going to be something, and we will have to wait and see. That's really all I have on the Derek Carr of it all. The Saints are probably going to draft a quarterback. We're going to have these conversations. They don't want to project a situation where they are definitely going to draft a quarterback, but there's only so much smoke screening you can do when everyone and their mother knows you kind of need a quarterback. Now, Mickey was asked how Spencer Rattler fits into this equation, and I did think his answer on that front was interesting. So let's hear it.
I mean, we're speculating here. Like I said, it just, we're in the business of developing quarterbacks. We like the guys we've got. That doesn't mean, we're going to draft. How many draft picks we got? 9? We're going to draft 9 players. They're going to be different positions. It doesn't mean that we don't like the guys at those positions that we have. It just means we're trying to add to the mix and create competition and make ourselves better. So I don't think it's any different.
Yeah, and so however you want to take that, the Saints are in the quarterback business. Where does Spencer Rattler slot in? How confident are you in Spencer Rattler? How confident is Kellen Moore in Spencer Rattler? Do you see him as a player that, if Derek Carr is not here, is he your starter? Is he your backup? Right? Like, that's what we need to figure out. And we're going to get more into the mock drafts later on. But at the end of the day, whoever you draft at quarterback is going to be your heir apparent at quarterback, whether he plays this year, whether he plays next year. And I just don't see a scenario where you don't come away from this draft with a quarterback. Now, that's just competition in that room. Spencer could still beat that guy out. Spencer could still turn into the better quarterback in that room. But I don't think anyone is banking on that right now. This is what Mickey had to say about the QB class in general.
Yeah, I think there's guys that are good quarterbacks, really good quarterbacks, and I don't know if the quantity is the same as some other years, but that goes up and down, And look, one thing about that position, I think that you fall in love with somebody, I think each of our teams, sometimes that's a different guy.
Going back to 15 with Derek Grayson and just going forward,
Yeah.
What is your guys' philosophy in terms of urgency and resource spending on just finding that young quarterback prospect?
Yeah, I think, look, one thing is different when, in the middle of, that's the middle of Drew Brees era, right? So there wasn't a lot of urgency about that, but you're always wanting to take swings and develop, the position. That's good business. I think the thing that you have to really resist is overdrafting and taking someone that way sooner, because that's opportunity cost, right? If we take somebody way sooner than maybe we should have, we're taking a swing. If it doesn't work out, we missed out on whatever player who ended up being the Pro Bowl, or whatever it is. So it's hard to resist, though. It's it's hard to do that sometimes.
What about the positions where there's like higher positional value and scarcity comes
Yeah.
into play? Is that even harder not to just like take a swing and like maybe reach?
Yeah, I think that what we perceive as high position value affects how we grade them, for example, and certainly affects whether we take somebody, particularly when you have them all graded in the same area, right? Even if you're strong at that position.
Yeah. And so, one thing Mickey said there is like, yeah, it's easy to fall in love with a prospect and say, we need to get this guy at whatever cost it takes. Will the Saints be that team? They have never been that team, at least not at the quarterback position. Like, they've been the team that's like, we want this guy. We're going to go get him. You saw him do it with Marcus Davenport. You saw him do it with a Kool-Aid McKinstry, right? You traded up because you wanted to get Kool-Aid McKinstry. Are you going to do that at the quarterback position? They have not done that under Mickey Loomis. You have not taken a quarterback in the second or first round. The only quarterback you've taken ahead of the fourth round is Garrett Grayson. Like, the question was relevant to. That didn't work out. That was the highest drafted quarterback the Saints have had since Mickey Loomis took over as GM, or at least the highest pick the Saints have made. Drew Brees was obviously a second round pick. He was the first pick of the second round, his number 31 overall, because there was only 30 teams back then. Saints just haven't done it. They'll tell you it's because Drew Brees has been here. I think it's because they grade these quarterbacks hard. And in a lot of cases, if you're not drafting in the top 10, you're probably not getting a star quarterback. You might get a really good developmental quarterback. But at the end of the day, like, people seem to think, hey, we're going to draft this guy, we're going to draft that guy. Look around the NFL and point to all of the later round quarterbacks that have had success, right? You have a couple. You have Brock Purdy, who is in a league of his own in terms of seventh round picks, right? Doesn't at any position, you don't see a lot of seventh round picks having success. You have Jalen Hurts, who was a second round pick, which isn't exactly a late round pick. You have Dak Prescott, who was a fourth round pick. You have Russell Wilson, who was a third round pick. That's pretty much it. It's not like you're seeing, and when you consider how many quarterbacks are drafted, you don't see guys just get drafted late and then show up. Like, it is rare to even see a guy get a chance to not be good when you are drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. Like, Spencer Rattler is an example of a player who was drafted in the 5th round and got legitimate run as a starting quarterback. There aren't that many of them. So we'll see how that goes. I think the Saints are going to fall in love with a quarterback in this class, or they have already fallen in love with a quarterback in this class. And I think they're going to try to go get him. Mickey will say that the draft approach doesn't change because of the Derek Carr injury situation. And I kind of feel like that's true. I think anyone would say that, but I think it's true because I don't think you went into this year, even if Derek Carr was fully healthy, saying, this is our quarterback of the future. Like, this is the guy who's going to get us through this year. This is not the guy that we'll be looking at 2 to 3 years down the road and saying, oh man, we're a Super Bowl team. No, this is the guy. He was a means to an end this offseason. And I think that's why the relationship between the team and player has degraded to such a degree, because you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be used as the bridge, but that's what he is. So if you were viewing a guy as a bridge, then you had to find the other side of that bridge. And until they do, the Saints are going to be in the quarterback business. So I don't see this changing at all. What they don't want to be viewed as is a desperate team who has no choice but to draft a quarterback. And I think that's what today was about. The Saints wanted to push down the Derek Carr headline as far as they could. They knew they could not disappear it. They knew it was going to be there. But the headline they wanted to produce was, okay, the Saints don't say anything about Derek Carr. Take what you want from that. Otherwise, in large part, people will move on to bigger and better things. One piece of news that Mickey Loomis did give us today, I asked him whether they had made a decision on the 5th-year options for Chris Olave and Trevor Penning. This is what he said.
Actually, I'll give you that. Here's the carrot. Where's Matt? Here's the care of that. So we are going to exercise the option on Chris, and we're not going to exercise the option on Trevor, but that doesn't mean we don't love Trevor and expect him to be part of our team going forward.
Yeah. So, I don't think that's a surprising thing. I really don't. Chris, I think if Chris was healthy, you'd be talking about, hey, what kind of extension are we giving him? In this case, you have a $16 million contract you can hand a guy to say, hey, can we get through a season healthy? Can we figure this out? If we can, then let's figure out that extension next year. But this at least gives the Saints some runway. People will take the Trevor Penning not getting his fifth-year option and run with it and say the Saints are done with him, they're moving on. I see this similar to the situation with Cesar Ruiz a couple years ago. Saints didn't pick up his option because, they felt like it was a better deal to just extend the guy. It gave him a 4-year, $44 million extension, $11 million per season. Had they signed him to his fifth-year option, the average would have been much higher. And I think that's going to be the case with Trevor, right? You're going to still go into this season, barring a high draft pick on a tackle prospect, you're going to still go into this season with him as your presumptive right tackle. And, if he plays well, if he has a strong camp, maybe you do extend him. If you get into the season and you want to see it play out, he plays well, maybe you do extend him. If he doesn't, then you probably move on. I don't think that changes anything as it pertains to the draft. I think you were always going to be there with Trevor, and you're not paying. It never made sense. However you landed on the Trevor Penning experience, to give him a 1-year contract worth $16 million when you could probably sign him to a 1-year extension for significantly less than that. You could probably sign him to a 2-year extension for significantly less than that. The 5th-year option is not as good of is not as simple of a scenario as people want to make it out to be, because it's a massive raise. Even the lowest level of the 5th-year option, which the Saints are looking at with these two players, you're talking about the average of the 3rd to 25th highest salary at those positions, right? Why are you paying that when you could just come to a deal with the guy? So I don't think Mickey's blowing smoke when he says, hey, doesn't mean we're out on the guy, because we've seen them do this with Cesar Ruiz. It's going to come down to how Trevor looks in camp, how the new coaching staff feels about the guy. Maybe you draft a tackle and he ends up being a backup, in which case you could probably sign that extension for even less. So I think it's more about finding out who that guy is and how he comes into this season. Remember, Trevor was changing positions last season. He was no guarantee that he was even going to be playable at right tackle. He ended up starting 17 games. He was healthy for the first time in his career throughout an entire season. So we'll see. Maybe he comes back this offseason, finally has an offseason at one position and can make some strides. I don't think he was terrible. I don't think he was great. I think he was kind of right there. He needs to continue developing. So if you can do that, fantastic. If you can't, all right, experiment over. But for now, that's where we are. But okay, Jeff Nowak, this is Inside Black and Gold. Quick episode coming to you prior to the first round of the draft on Thursday. Going to hit the break here, come back, play you an interview that Steve Geller and myself did with Justin Mello of the Draft Network, break down a bunch of prospects, get ready for what the Saints could potentially do at number 9, number 40, and everywhere else on Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday in the 2025 NFL Draft. Who dat? Go Saints. Subscribe. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak coming at you solo, but I am going to bring in the voice of Steve Geller as well as Justin Mello of the Draft Network. As promised, here's an interview that Steve and I did with Justin, breaking down a bunch of the prospects the Saints could be looking at on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for the NFL Draft. Here you go.
Justin Mello, who covers the NFL for the Draft Network. I was taken back just today, Justin, seeing the NFL latest mock draft from ESPN, and an analyst there had all of a sudden now Tyler Shuck jumping up to number 9 overall to the New Orleans Saints. It seems like this New Orleans squad has been connected to just about every quarterback besides Cam Ward in this year's draft.
Yeah, certainly. I think that would be the stunner of day one if something like that were to happen. I don't see it. As we get closer to the draft, I think it's pretty clear that at most we're going to get 3 in the first round. I personally think it's going to be 2. Tyler Shook should just not be in that conversation. I mean, appreciate what he did at Louisville this year. It was nice to see him healthy and get through a season. But this is not a first round quarterback, and I don't think it's certainly not a top 10 quarterback. One who's been in college for I think it was 6 years. So I don't know who you said wrote it, but it's I don't know what we're doing if we're putting him in the top 10, 9 overall in mock drafts. I just don't see that happening on Thursday, not one bit.
I think it's kind of a projecting the Saints to do something that makes people say, what? Because that's what it made me do sure. What they do so well. But, I think Shuck's an interesting guy. And, Steve and I were talking earlier. It's like, why is he suddenly jumping up and people are talking about him now? I think it's a situation where teams have been talking about Tyler Shuck for a while. I think there is a lot of interest in him from NFL teams, but he just kind of flew under the radar for a while in the mock draftiverse of everything, right? Like, I don't think he was, high on simulators, so everyone was running mock drafts and he wasn't showing up in theirs. But I do think that he is a guy that teams are high on. I agree with you. I don't think he's a top 10 guy. But what is your read on him as a quarterback if the Saints do end up with him maybe a little later in the draft, maybe late first round, early second round?
Yeah, I'm certainly intrigued. Again, it was nice to see him healthy this past year, right? He had some devastating injuries throughout his college football career, and he's been around a bunch of programs, right? So nice to see him healthy. Thought he played his best football this year, certainly. I think he can make every throw. I think he's got the required arm strength. He's got good size for the position. Where it starts to fall apart for me is under pressure. If you look at everything, and it's true of a lot of quarterbacks, but the completion percentage, the advanced metrics, the turnover-worthy play rates, certainly the turnovers, everything just goes up to an uncomfortable range when under pressure. So that's where I have pause. I'm a little concerned about the decision-making when under duress. Now, again, I think he could make all the throws. He's got the size. I don't think arm strength is an issue. I think he's got good velocity. The ball pops out of his hand. But I think the ability to sort of handle pressure is one I still got a major question about.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for a lot of guys. And, I've seen, I think it was Greg Cosell who was talking about, quarterbacks that get sacked a lot in college. The data suggests that, that doesn't go away when they get to the NFL. I think it's a conversation to have around Shedeur Sanders. He led the NCAA in sacks last year. Where do you land on that? Do you think that that can be explained away as poor offensive line, or do you have to kind of look at that as a potential issue for a quarterback coming up from college to the NFL?
It is a potential issue in my evaluation for him and any quarterback that deals. I mean, Will Levis was the same thing in college. He got sacked quite a bit. He got sacked a lot for the Titans this past year. So with Shedeur, I'll tell you what gives me a lot of pause. And I spoke to it's actually a scout said this to me the other day. When you watch him versus Cam Ward, for example, the two quarterbacks that were quote unquote neck and neck throughout this process, when Cam Ward's under pressure, he moves side to side. He moves up in the pocket to buy time. This is exactly what a scout told me. You watch Shedeur Sanders, he goes back. He moves backwards when he's under pressure. That's not going to fly in the NFL. There is no path to success escaping the pocket backwards, right? Just disaster waiting to happen. So for me, I am incredibly concerned about that. There's a lot about his game I like. I think he's probably the most accurate quarterback in this class. He probably has the highest football IQ. He is so good pre-snap, almost sort of Brock Purdy-like in that sense, where he doesn't have the strongest arm, not going to win with arm strength and velocity. He's going to win with dissecting what the defense is doing pre-snap and executing post-snap, right? That's where he wins. But for me, the lack of pocket awareness, the sack numbers, yes, their offensive line wasn't great, wasn't even good, but I thought he did bring up a fair bit of it on himself. I think the arm strength is below average, same with the velocity. And then, I don't see the type of athlete that's going to navigate pressure at a successful rate. So there are certainly some red flags for me in his evaluation. And that's a great one by Greg Cosell. I'm on the same page there.
looking at some LSU talent in this draft, a lot of talk, obviously, Will Campbell, some consider the top tackle prospect. Just wondering your stance on Campbell, where he could possibly end up in the draft. And then somebody really that hasn't been talked about maybe as much, I feel like, is Emory Jones Jr., and where you think he could end up going on what day.
Yeah, regarding Will Campbell, it's interesting, right? Because, he's the favorite to go number 4 overall to the New England Patriots, and he's been the betting favorite in that market as well. I'm not convinced, as someone who covered Mike Vrabel for a long time there in Tennessee, he was pretty strong opinions about short-arm tackles and wingspans for tackles. So I have a hard time thinking that he's going to take this guy at 4 and ask him to be the blindside protector for Drake May, franchise quarterback there. The interesting thing about Will is if he doesn't go number 4 to New England, I'll be honest with you, I start having a hard time figuring out the landing spot in the top 10. I think he could slide all the way to like 13 to the Miami Dolphins if it's not 4 to New England. So be interesting to see. I always feel for these guys because when you watch the tape, the tape at left tackle is quite good on Will Campbell, right? There's no denying that the tape is impressive. But these measurements matter, and they matter to almost every single NFL team. Every evaluator is going to tell you. And it's not just that he's short-armed and the wingspan. It's historically short, right? So he would be almost a historical outlier to be a success story at left tackle. I love the tape at left tackle. I feel bad for him. I almost wonder if you let him fail at left tackle first, is what they say. And if he does fail, you kick him inside to guard, but you give him that chance at least to play tackle. It'll be interesting to see where he lands and how they handle that. With Emory Jones, I came into this past year with higher expectations. I don't know if you guys remember. I mean, there were preseason mocks that had him in the first round.
Right.
I don't certainly not. Didn't live up to that billing. It's going to be day 3. It's certainly not going to be the second or third round. I think it's probably the 4th or 5th round, and I think there's a good chance he kicks inside to guard as well.
Just keeping on LSU, I'm curious what your takes are on Mason Taylor and just the tight end class in general, because there's some really intriguing names, and I think you could see multiple first round tight ends, which doesn't happen that often. How do you see that Mason Taylor kind of fitting in there, and what are your takes on like the maybe the top 5-6 tight ends and how they could kind of land in this year's draft?
Yeah, I think Mason Taylor's an exceptional prospect. In fact, I said on another show earlier today, I think there's a chance he sneaks into the back half of the first round. Like, if you're looking for surprise first-round selections, I wouldn't be shocked if he gets there 25 to 32 range. Just a really dangerous pass catcher, up the seam, difficult assignment in coverage for linebackers and safeties. Now, he's a pass catcher first. I'm not going to ask him to do a ton of inline blocking. That's okay. They don't have Travis Kelce to do that either, right? When you're such an effective pass catcher, you got to understand how to use those traits to the best of your disposal for your offense. So for me, Mason Taylor is super, super impressive. He's my tight end 3, behind the obvious 2, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. Again, I think you can go back into the first round. I think if you're one of those teams that's into those tight ends and you don't get one of them early, potentially them going both top 20 and Warren and Loveland, if you get Mason Taylor in the second round, I think it's a hell of a consolation prize at tight end. Again, he's my number 3. For 4, I go Elijah Arroyo out of Miami. Similar player. I think he's a very dangerous pass catcher, tough assignment for linebackers. At number 5, I go, maybe it's a bit of a surprise, but I really like the inline guy from Oregon, Terrence Ferguson, who I think does both. In fact, he's a better inline guy than Arroyo and Taylor are, but he's not quite as doesn't have quite as much upside as a pass catcher. Still going to be a good weapon in that area, but I don't think he's got elite upside. The other 2, Taylor especially, LSU, I think there's elite upside there as a pass catcher. Very excited to see where he lands. Don't be shocked if it's on Thursday.
Yeah, I was out at LSU's Pro Day last month, and the thing that impressed me with Mason, and you don't want to draw too much of these workouts and whatever, he put up 28 reps on the bench press, and he did it impressively. Like sometimes you'll be watching, they'll kind of struggle through the last like 5 or 6. He got through like 25 clean, and then it was like, oh, how many is he going to get? And like, to me, that's the question: does he have the strength to hold up at, like, he can run routes, he's an athlete. But I think that's the question for a lot of guys like Harold Fannin, like guys like that. Like, okay, I know you can catch the ball, I know you can run and jump and leap. Can you be a blocker? Do I have to have a second tight end to throw on the field anytime I want to run the ball? How do you feel about that part of the game? Like, it's hard to, you don't see a lot of tight ends coming out these days that slot immediately into a all around tight end role.
Right. And there are a couple of good blockers in this class, but again, not a ton of pass catching upside. Mitch Evans out of Notre Dame, Jackson Hawes out of Georgia Tech, very, very good blockers. When it comes to Mason, you'd like to see the strength, as you said, the bench press reps there at the pro day. I think the technique is still very much a work in progress. They didn't ask him to do it a ton. Again, we always tend to use this as such a negative. They shouldn't have asked him to do it a ton. He is such a dangerous pass catcher. And a lot of these teams in the NFL, they've got a designated guy that can do it. That's why you see guys like, Anthony Fasano play 12 years in the NFL because they're so good at it. So I think these teams nowadays, they're okay with it. If you're going to give me just terrific upside as a pass catcher like he does, I'm probably going to have a number 2 or 3 that can do it anyway. And, guys like George Kittle, that's a unicorn, man. A guy that's that elite at both, it's so rare. Usually you're going to get one or the other, and I'm totally fine with making Mason Taylor my primary pass catcher.
Justin, always great stuff from you, man. Curious, too, with that number 9 overall pick that the Saints do own, if you're running the show for the Saints and you're looking at the draft board, who do you think, one, will be there for them, and who would you end up taking for this squad?
Yeah, I think the 3 names that I keep coming back to, and it's funny, all at 3 different positions, it's T-Mac, right? It's Ted McMillan out of Arizona. I look at Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. And I look at Armand Embo out of Missouri, the offensive tackle. I think if one of them is there, I'm fairly confident the Saints would make that pick. I think the Missouri tackle is probably the one they would prefer. I'm not convinced he's going to be there, but it's still a bit of a transitional year for New Orleans. No one knows what's happening at quarterback. Fuaga, I thought, played well at left tackle last year. You're keeping him there now. I would take the Missouri right tackle because I'd be so confident in his ability to slide right in there. And I know I've got my bookends for the next 10 years. If he gets there, I think that's the ideal pick for them. At receiver, I think they could use a big-bodied boundary X. I think the depth chart there is okay. It's certainly not in terrible standing. They brought back Brandon Cooks. Hopefully, Shaheed is healthy. Of course, Olave, a phenomenal player. But I think I'd like to see a different kind of guy, towering presence on the boundary. Ted McMillan would offer them something they don't have. And then again, Shamar Stewart, it's a high risk, high reward, right? Production wasn't really there, but you look at the body type, it's moldable. The measurables are out of this world. The combine is one of the best combine performances of the past 5 years. I'm fairly confident they're going to take one of those 3 talents.
All right, Justin, really quick here. I always get a kick out of asking you this every year because the number always makes me laugh. How many prospects have you talked to so far during this process?
I'm about to, by the end of next week, I'm going all the way to Saturday, by the way, because I've got so many. I'm going to be publishing on day 3 still. We're going to be at about 215.
215 prospects. If anyone's questioning the credentials here, there you go.
We got 215 prospect interviews up on the Draft Network. I conducted all 215.
Awesome stuff, Justin. Check out his great work at the Draft Network. Always appreciate your time and enjoy the wild NFL draft. We'll see how things end up shaking out.
Pleasure. Everyone hop on the Draft Network and take the new mock draft machine for a ride. You're going to love it.
All right. Thanks again to Justin Mello for coming on. If you have not, please check out his work over at the Draft Network. He does a great job. Like he said, he's talked to 200 plus prospects over the course of the last few months. I don't even know how you do that. Where's the time for 200 interviews? Either way, it's great stuff. Definitely go check it out. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'll be coming back running through the mock drafts 4.0, the final mock drafts for myself and Steve Geller. Steve's not here to answer for it, but I do want him to get the blame for being wrong when it occurs. So, again, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Otherwise, stick around. We'll be right back on Inside Black and Gold. And we are back. One more segment here on Inside Black and Gold. And really, it's just going to be me reading off a bunch of names because I have Steve's mock draft, I have my mock draft, and we went 7 full rounds. I even made a trade. So it's going to take a good bit of time to get through them all. So let's not waste any time. I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to start with Steve's mock draft, and let's see what it looks like. Wow, it almost even fits the way I wanted it to. Sweet. Let's see if I can change this around. No, that's what we're going to go with. So let's just start. Cam Ward, number 1, goes to the Titans. This is kind of an interesting first 4. Don't have Shedeur Sanders. The Browns pass on Shedeur Sanders, take Abdul Carter. The Giants pass on Shedeur Sanders, take Travis Hunter. And you got Mason Graham, Ashton Genty, Armand Membu, Will Campbell to the Jets, Matthew Golden to the Panthers, wide receiver out of Texas. That's a bit weird. Sometimes I wonder if Steve sets his randomness up a little too high because I do not buy that Matthew Golden's going to be the first wide receiver off the board. Definitely not going to be in the top 8, but that's where we are. And so Steve gets on the clock. Shedeur Sanders is there. Tet McMillan is there. It's a lot of guys to pick from. He goes Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. I can't say I'm mad about it. I also think the Saints should consider taking Tyler Warren. I think they should consider taking a star, right? And I know that sounds simple. And number 9, I need to feel like the player I'm getting is a star. And it's tough sometimes because you don't want to reach, you don't want to overdraft, you don't want to kind of fall in love with a name or a highlight reel and then just land on a guy who doesn't have it at the NFL level. But here we are. Tyler Warren, can't be mad about it. Tet McMillan goes next off the board. Jahdae Barron to the 49ers at number 11. Let's just fast forward to Steve's pick at number 40. Actually, let's stop and say Shedeur Sanders goes off at pick number 26 to the Rams. Now, that's an interesting one. I actually could see this happening. So if the Steelers do not take a quarterback in Shedeur Sanders, they go for Texas tackle Kelvin Banks in this mock, and he falls to 26. And yes, the Rams are in the quarterback business. They need a quarterback. Matthew Stafford, as good as he still is, he's getting up there. Like, this is around the time you want to be drafting the next quarterback. So that would actually make a lot of sense to me. And that's why we get into this range past the Rams that I think suddenly, if the quarterback you love, if you're the Saints and the quarterback you love gets to this point, you got to start getting on the phones and potentially trading up to go get him, because there's no guarantee that someone else isn't going to do that, right? Like, that's kind of like, there's no one here that's going to draft a quarterback. The Ravens aren't going to draft a quarterback. The Lions aren't going to draft a quarterback. The Commanders aren't going to draft a quarterback. The Bills aren't going to draft a quarterback. The Chiefs aren't going to draft a quarterback. The Eagles aren't going to draft a quarterback. But the Browns at 33, yes, they very much could draft a quarterback, and they very much could trade up to go get him. The Giants at 34, yes, they very much could draft a quarterback. They very much could trade up to go get him. So if you're the Saints, your job is to make sure you get your guy. So whether that's trading up to 32, whether that's trading up to 30, whether that's, heck, trading up to 33, if the Browns decide, I'm not drafting a quarterback, you need to get up in front of the Giants. Sure. In this case, the Browns don't draft a quarterback. They take Elik Ayyamanyor out of Stanford. The Giants end up with Jackson Dart. Steve stands pat at number 40. So let's see what we got. Jalen Milroe, quarterback out of Alabama. I have to say, I don't see it in the second round. I don't think the Saints should be going after Jalen Milroe in the second round. I think he is a third, fourth round guy at best. I tweeted this the other day. Tom Pelissero, he puts out his annual, basically anonymous roundup of executives talking about players. And the assessment of Jalen Milroe was honestly kind of hilarious. It's the most honest assessment I've ever seen. And it's true. It's, expletives deleted. Basically, you're talking about a guy who goes out there, throws everything as hard as he possibly can, not a lot of touch, not a lot of accuracy. He's got to see it open He's a little slow from a processing perspective. It's not an intelligence thing. It's just a processing thing. He is the fastest player on the field. He might be one of the stronger guys on the field, but that's not a quarterback. It's very similar to how I would expect Taysom Hill to have been described coming out of college. And the question I am interested in hearing the answer to from a lot of people is, no, if you had the ability to go back in time to, what was it, 2016, 2015, when Taysom Hill was coming out of college, and knowing what Taysom Hill would do in his NFL career, where would you draft Taysom Hill? Would he be a first round pick? I can't imagine he would be. Would he be a second round pick? It's tough. It's tough. And I think he would probably be a second round pick, a high second round pick. But that's knowing what you know Taysom Hill is going to be able to do. I don't know what Jalen Milroe is going to be able to do. Will Jalen Milroe accept a role like that? Probably not. Most quarterbacks wouldn't. So I just think it's an interesting conversation. Either way, Steve lands with Jalen Milroe. Fast forward to number 71, Ozzie Trapilo, offensive tackle out of Boston College. Kind of a legacy there. 93, you get running back Damian Martinez out of Miami. I like where Steve is going in the sense that, okay, you got your tight end, you got your quarterback, you got your tackle, you got your running back. These are all positions that I think the Saints need to add people at. I probably would have gone a little differently. Fast forward to 112, you got Savion Jones, edge rusher out of LSU. I like this pick. He's a guy I landed on in a couple different mocks. I think he's a good outside linebacker prospect. I think he's a guy who can help Brandon Staley's defense translate to what it needs to do. So I like that pick. 112 out of LSU. Sure. Fast forward to the next one. You got wide receiver Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas. Now, fun name. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I know a ton about Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas, but he lands on Steve's mock draft. We're going to get into the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and I'm just going to tell you in advance, there's a lot of picks here that I can't make heads or tails of. I do not stare at the Louisville defensive backfield to tell you who Quincy Riley is. I don't know Luke Kendra from whoever else. So, a lot of these are guesses. Trevor Etienne goes all the way to the Packers at 159. Scroll. The next pick for Steve, 184, Cameron Jackson out of Florida. And, I think this is likely. One thing that Mickey Loomis said in his availability today is that he sees this as a draft with a lot of defensive linemen in it, a lot of potential impact defensive linemen. And, to me, that's an indicator that he's looking at that position as one that should be pretty deep, right? Like should be on the board late. So you should be able to add players at that position late in the draft. So I wouldn't be surprised if, regardless of what happens up toward the top, that you look real deep at some of these defensive tackle, defensive end, edge rusher prospects. Tyler Shuck goes at 185 here, which I think there's just so much hype around this guy's name. There's no way he gets out of the second round. I just don't see it. A couple more for the Saints coming in here in the 7th round. 248, you got safety Jalen Reed out of Penn State. 254, linebacker Eugene Asante out of Auburn. Again, I don't know a ton about these guys, but generally speaking, when you're talking about picks this late in the draft, special teams contributors is a win. If you have a guy who's able to get on the field as a special teamer and you're picking up in the 7th round, that's a win. And in most cases, in this case specifically, you're looking at, okay, who do you not want to compete for on the UDFA market? Because that's who you're bringing in. So let's just take a look at I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and let's take a look at the draft board in general. Here you go. So there it is. Again, that's a lot of picks. Steve made 9 picks. And when you look at a draft class with 9 players in it, man, that's a lot of picks. It's just kind of crazy. Yeah, it's like this is a long. I'm just kind of seeing my life flash before my eyes because this is going to be a long weekend of picks. But again, so at 9, you got Tyler Warren. At 40, you got Jalen Milroe. 71, tackle Ozzie Trapillo out of Boston College. 93, you got halfback Damian Martinez out of Miami. 112, LSU edge rusher Xavion Jones. 131, Arkansas wide receiver Isaac Tesla. 184, you got Florida defensive tackle Cameron Jackson. 248, you got Penn State safety Jalen Reed. 254, Auburn linebacker Eugene Asante. It's a fun name to say. I'm rooting for the Saints to draft Eugene Asante, so I can say Eugene Asante more often. But all right, let's move on to my mock draft, which is I'm gonna be honest, I kind of hate it. Genuinely, I kind of hate my own mock draft, which is probably not a good thing, but it's where we are. All right, so there it is. You have Cam Ward at number 1 overall to the Titans, Abdul Carter at number 2 overall to the Browns, Travis Hunter at number 3 overall to the Giants. So again, the Browns, Giants both pass on Shedeur Sanders, and it's when you I just think, it's if he gets past those two teams and the teams at the top of the draft are telling you they do not see this guy as a first round pick, then I don't know. If you're the Saints, I just don't see that. I don't see the Saints seeing him as a first round pick. I don't see most of these teams seeing him as a first round pick, but he does go in this draft. Ted McMillan comes off at number 4. Mason Graham comes off to the Jags at number 5. Ashton Genty to the Raiders at number 6. I do think that's a likely landing spot. And then Shedeur Sanders goes to the Jets at number 7. And this is an interesting one because I do think, for whatever reason, the Jets are not getting talked about as a QB needy team. But why? Why aren't we talking about the Jets as a QB needy team? Because they signed Justin Fields? That's not a commitment. Sure, they paid him, but that doesn't mean you're not drafting a guy. So I actually think, while we kind of spent a lot of time talking about Browns, Giants, Saints, Shedeur Sanders could end up on the Jets. And I don't see why you would rule out the Jets in that conversation. So I do think that's interesting. Will Campbell comes off at number 8. So I do not have Ted McMillan, who would have been probably a pick. I do not have Will Campbell, who I would have highly considered. I do not have Shedeur Sanders, who I would have considered. I don't have Ashton Genty, who, a lot of these picks are picks that I would have highly considered making. So who do I end up with? I change my mind. I was going to go offense here. I really was. I was thinking Tyler Warren. I was thinking Ted McMillan. Tyler Warren is on the board. But at the end of the day, and we talked about this in the last episode, I see edge rusher, outside linebacker as my biggest need. I'm the Saints. I am changing defensive schemes. I need to give my new defensive coordinator the players he needs to succeed. And I think Mike Green, might be the best outside linebacker edge rusher option past Abdul Carter. I think people will hate this pick. I think they'll look at it as another Marcus Davenport, whatever. They'll say, oh, small school guy. I don't trust it. You're reaching. Maybe you are. I just think this is a Saints pick, and this is probably the pick the Saints going to make. Right. And so let's see if I can get this right. Right. I'm going to try to get the pick right. So whether I like it or not, I would much rather see Tyler Warren. I would much rather see one of the other guys. I think Mike Green is actually very much a Saints pick. And we'll go from there. So that's who I'm going with at number 9. And I don't think it's a bad pick. I think people just won't like it because Marshall, small school. Yeah. Jalen Walker goes next at number 10. Armand Membu at 11. Michael Williams at number 12. Will Johnson at number 13. These are all guys who would have been options. Jihad Campbell, linebacker out of Alabama, goes to number 14 to the Colts. Tyler Warren falls all the way to 15 to the Falcons, which would probably annoy some folks. I would be surprised if they really want to load up on tight ends that way. But hey, it is what it is. Jahdae Barron falls all the way to number 17. Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan, goes to the Bucks at number 19. Donovan Ezeraku, who was my pick in the last mock when I traded back, goes to the Steelers at 21. So they pass on a quarterback. Omarion Hampton's the next running back off the board, goes to the Vikings at number 24. I've seen him comp to Deuce McAllister. So if you're thinking the Saints might try to repeat history, maybe they go after Omarion Hampton. Rams don't go quarterback in this mock. They go Shamar Stewart. So he falls all the way to 26. I still could see the Saints going Shamar Stewart. He's a tradesy guy. All the potential, none of the production. So we'll see. And this is where it starts to get interesting because none of these teams are taking quarterbacks, but I want one. And so what do? I call up my old trading partner in the Eagles who have fleeced me a few times. I'm not going to let them fleece me again, but I am going to trade with them at number 32. So what am I going to send? I'm going to send the number 40 pick. I'm going to send the number 112 pick, which is my first pick in the 4th round. And I'm going to send the number 248 pick, which is my first pick in the 7th round. So the Eagles, a team that is going to need to kind of clear the decks a little bit, get some young talent, adds a few more picks. Now, why would the Eagles do this? I don't know. All I know is PFF accepted the trade, and I'm the Saints, and my goal in this is I want to move up. I do not want to give up any future picks. I definitely don't want to give up any premium future picks. If you end up having to ship over a 4th rounder from 26, I was not the end of the world. You are getting, and that you're probably going to get a comp pick for Paulson Adebo in that range. So I think that's kind of fair. But if I'm making a trade and I'm giving up anything above a 4th rounder for next year, that is a massive no for me. I do not want to be trading knowing that I'm probably in line for a tough season this year. Maybe you surprise folks. Maybe you win a bunch of games that people aren't going to be favoring you to win. But I can't be trading future assets knowing that these are probably going to be pretty elite assets. So that's what I trade. The 40 pick, the 112, the 248. And for whatever reason, Philadelphia says yes. And I am doing this to drive y'all up the wall. You're going to hate this pick, but I like this pick. It's Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, 25-year-old quarterback. I just think the Saints like him. I think the Saints are high on him. Now, Jackson Dart is a guy still on the board. I think the Saints are going to have Shuck ahead of Jackson Dart, personally. I kind of feel like we are in prime disinformation mode season, and reports coming out that the Saints are high on Jackson Dart at this point, to me, reeks of misinformation, right? Like, I think that report is coming out because the team wants people to think they're going to go take Jackson Dart. And I think in reality, they're looking at a quarterback who is 6'5", who's probably the second best pure thrower in this draft behind Cam Ward, has some sketchy traits, right? He has an injury history. I think he panics when he sees pressure a little bit, but I do think he navigates it reasonably well. And, I think as you advance at the NFL level, you'll improve in that regard. He's probably the most pro ready, comes out of a pro style offense. And we'll see how it goes. I think the Saints, whether it's Tyler Shuck, whether it's Jackson Dart, I think this is where you're going to see the Saints try to trade up and go get a quarterback, whether it's 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, heck, even 33. If the Browns don't want to draft a quarterback and want to try to pick up assets, I think this is where you're going to try to go get one. So that's my big prediction here is the Saints are going to trade up either at the top of the 2nd round, back end of the 1st round, and take Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, which PFF, I can already tell you in advance, going to give me an F because they have him rated real low. But I'm just telling you, like, teams have him a lot higher, right? Teams around the NFL, front offices, scouting departments, they have him rated a lot higher than all of these mock drafts are telling you. So we'll see how it goes. I would be stunned if Tyler Shuck gets out of the 2nd round. Anyway, moving on. So we do not have the number 40 pick anymore. We've traded that away for the number 32 pick. So you've made 2 first-round picks. Your next pick is going to come all the way at 71. So let's scroll down. Jack Besh goes to the Eagles at number 40. So if the Saints had stood pat at number 40, they could have ended up with Jack Besh. Wouldn't have hated it. Could have got Jaden Higgins, a guy I drafted previously. Wouldn't have hated it. Maxwell Hairston, 39. So this is the price of going to get a quarterback, right? You're giving up picks and you're trading out of a spot where you could get some really high quality players, high caliber players. But I want my quarterback, so I went and got him. Scrolling down, 71, next pick off the board. Shamar Turner, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. Again, I just think you're going to want to build that defense. Like, I trust Kellen Moore to kind of massage this offense into a workable unit. Now, it's tough when you don't feel confident about your quarterback, but I don't think that I need to bend over backwards to get elite weapons for Kellen Moore in year one. I need to set him up with a defense that can support that offense. Because I don't care how good your offense is. If you're not stopping anybody, you're not winning games, right? Now, you could outscore people, you could do whatever. The only way to sustainably win at the NFL level is to have a defense that can get stops and have an offense that can complement it, right? Like, when did the Saints start being elite? Was it when Drew Brees was in his prime? Or was it when you coupled Drew Brees with a defense that could actually get off the field? Right? And I'm not talking about 2011. I'm not talking about 2012. I'm not talking about the Super Bowl. I'm talking about, okay, you had this run of 7 and 9 seasons. Why was that? Was Drew Brees the problem? Was the offense the problem? Or was it the defense that couldn't get off the field? Right? Like, I feel like Sean Payton was a good example of a guy who you didn't need to give him elite assets. I think good offensive coaches, you don't have to pair them with elite assets at every position. You have to get them the right assets at every position and find a way to support that offense with the defensive side of the ball, right? And if Brandon Staley's not it, then you're going to have to keep cycling through. But I need to make sure that I give the defense the pieces it needs, because I'm changing schemes on offense. I have the pieces to change those schemes. I don't feel like I have the pieces on defense right now. So that's where I'm building. I am building on the defensive side of the ball. I'm bringing in Shamar Turner, defensive tackle. I feel like my defensive line is in a real good way, and we're going to go from there. Moving on, next pick is 93, and I address what I would argue is the next biggest need that I haven't addressed yet, and that is offensive line. I grabbed Miles Frazier, guard out of LSU, a player I like. I've seen a good bit of him. You could slot in Jonas Savagnaia out of Arizona. You could slot in anyone that you like here. I just think you're taking a guard at some point in this draft that you're going to try to develop into a starter. This is around the same range you took Nick Saldiveri. So, I'd like Saldiveri to show up and own that spot. I'd like Dylan Radins to look good in that spot. All I know is I got to keep drafting offensive linemen until I strike some gold here. And right now, this is my pick. I'm going with Miles Frazier, a guy I've watched a good bit of. He's versatile. He can bump out the tackle in a pinch. You saw him do that at the Senior Bowl. So, I know that's always going to help when you're trying to bring in a guy and he can play multiple positions. So, and also we've moved past this era where we don't bring in LSU players. So that's where we are. Next pick is a familiar one down at 131. Same guy I took in the last mock, and that is Trevor Etienne, running back out of Georgia. I think he's going to show up and be an immediate contributor as a third down back. He can catch the ball. Little small on the small side, but that's okay for me because I'm pairing him with Alvin Kamara. I think I'm going to try to get Alvin into more of an early downs role and get kind of a scat back who can take some of that load off of him, because I want Alvin on the field on the money downs, but I don't want him on the field for all of these third downs, all of these pass pro sets. So that's where I go. All right, a couple more picks, and then we will get the heck out of here. 184. These are concept picks. You could sell me on 90 different players at these spots. I want a safety. I want a guy who's going to come up and hit. I want a guy who's going to contribute on special teams. I want a guy who's going to want to play for his home team. And so I go with Caleb Branshaw. He's a Louisiana native. He's out at the Senior Bowl. The Saints got a good look at him. They did their local pro day so they could have him in without even counting as the top 30. I wouldn't hate it. I like the idea of keeping locals local. And, at the end of the day, you're talking about the 184 pick in the draft. You could go all of these different directions. I kind of want a safety. I want a special teams contributor, and that's what I got. Final pick, 254. Scroll. Remember, we traded 248 to the Eagles, and they took Cam Horsley, defensive tackle out of Boston College. Now that I'm thinking about it, let's go back to 112 before I finish off here. I just want to see who the Eagles took with the pick I traded them. Danny Stutzman, linebacker out of Oklahoma. Danny Stutzman sounds like a car insurance salesman, but good for them. I'm rooting for him. Rooting for Mr. Stutzman. All right. Final pick, 254. Guy, go. Finally, we drafted tight end. This is the one everyone wanted, right? Maliki Mataval out of UCLA. You know, he's an interesting guy. He's bigger. And I think the Saints, if they're taking a tight end this late in the draft, I'm pairing him with Juwan Johnson. I want a bigger guy who can block, and I think he can do that. He's a big dude. He can. I have questions about the mobility. Isn't the fleetest of foot? He's a little stiff getting downfield, but he's 6'6", 260. He ran a 4.8, 140, a 32-inch vertical leap. I think that's just a guy that makes some sense for the Saints. If you're trying to add to that room, I want a guy who can get out there and block. Foster Moreau, I think he's still going to be part of that room. I actually ran into him at the Saints facility the other day. It looks like he's moving around. I don't think that knee has been a huge issue for him, but I do want to keep adding pieces to that room. And I don't know if the Saints really have that kind of premier blocking tight end that most teams need. I think the Saints want to operate out of 12, and maybe Maliki is a guy who can do that. But that's it. That's my mock draft. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will toss up PFF's I hate this guy grades for the 7-round mock that I just put out there. And here you go. Solid C minus. You know, they say D's get degrees. They don't win Super Bowls, but they do get degrees. So let's remind you, at number 9 overall, I took Mike Green, edge rusher out of Marshall. Then I traded the number 40 pick, 112 and 248 to the Eagles for number 32. Took Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, as you can see. PFF, not a fan. The funniest part is when their AI like explainer of like, I hate this pick because you should have taken this guy instead. Their reason is the Saints already have a franchise quarterback. That's a direct quote. Says it right on there. That's why. So I don't know. I think we have a little bit of time before AI takes over, before Skynet becomes self-aware. Anyway, defensive tackle Shamar Turner out of Texas A&M. Saints take him at number 71. Then they grab guard Miles Frazier at number 93. Georgia running back Trevor Etienne at number 131. Tulane safety Caleb Bransott at number 184. And then UCLA tight end Maliki Mataval at 254. That's it. That's the mock draft. That's the final one. I hate it. If this is the Saints draft class, I'm going to be so upset. Anyway, but that's where I landed. You know, there's no right answers. There's no right answers. At a certain point, you know, it's one of the reasons I wish I was an Eagles fan, because all the Eagles do is just draft the consensus top pick left on the board. They just take all the Georgia players. It worked out for them. So I kind of wish the Saints would start doing that too. But hey, they insist on scouting and getting it right. And so that's where we are. But all right, that's it. This is Inside Black and Gold. We're going to have a lot of content coming to you on WWL Radio over the next few days. We're going to have interviews with every Saints draft pick immediately after the selections are made. I will be at Saints camp kind of getting all of the information there. We'll have Zoom calls with all the draft picks as well. I'll be hanging out with Deuce McAllister tomorrow. We're going to have interviews with Brandon Staley, Kellen Moore, Mickey Loomis, Jeff Ireland, Michael Parrington, all these guys, Doug Nussmeier. So make sure to tune in for that. I'll try to get as much of it here as possible, but it's just a crazy few days and I never end up with enough time to do a great job of getting things over to YouTube. So make sure to check that out. We'll also have a recap show on Sunday on WWL that I will turn into an episode of the podcast. So that's been popular in the past. It's going to be myself, Steve Geller, and Charlie Long. And then we'll have plenty of time to talk about all these draft picks. I appreciate everyone who hangs out, everyone who enjoys the podcast, listens to the podcast. We will continue to bring it to you all throughout the offseason, all throughout the next season. Hopefully it's a more fun season than the last few have been. Until then, who dat? Go Saints. BZL. Peace.